Hello and welcome to Grody and UnPrOfesSiOnAL. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we discuss the challenges of modifying the corporate playbook as you expand internationally to the professional response at the appearance of Finnish coconuts. Today, I am joined by a good friend of mine and longtime coworker, Benoit Blateyron.
Hey, good morning.
How are you today?
No, very well.
Now, I want you to know you are the first person to come to our podcasting studio here that is an international visitor.
No pressure.
The budget is pretty low for Grody and UnPrOfesSiOnAL, and so when I asked you to come and you said, yeah, I'll be right there, I was so humbled that you flew halfway across the world just to come and join me for this podcast.
Just for the recording.
That's right. I'm so excited to get to spend some time chatting with you. As I said, you and I have worked together for about 8 years at Precision Planting. My role in a lot of those years was over the technical side of the business, and your role was over the commercial side of the business, specifically in Europe. I'm just so excited to hear the lessons that you've picked up. You were one of the very first employees of Precision Planting in Europe and really started from both a brand and a product line that the European continent had almost no familiarity with. So you were the first person on the continent to talk about it. And then also, how do you take a recipe that has worked successfully in one continent, and what ingredients do you keep the same, and what ingredients do you change as you move to a new continent? I'm very excited to chat on all those topics. But the first and most important question, and one of the most unique parts about you as a friend of mine and as a Frenchman, is that you are a huge Packers fan.
Yes.
And I can't imagine that there are many Packers fans in your neighborhood where you grew up. Help me understand, how does someone who's born and raised in France end up as a Packers fan, a diehard Packers fan?
I'm a rugby guy in Europe. So we don't have a lot of football teams.
Right.
Most of our sports is done in clubs. So you pretty much pick between soccer or rugby. Okay. Started soccer in our small town and then picked rugby just because, physically, I think I fit more.
You're built more like a rugby player.
Rugby type than the soccer. Our practices would be on Wednesdays. Okay. And so right after lunch, I was used to have lunch at my grandparents', and around 2 p.m. local time, we had one of the TV channel broadcasting NFL games, like usually Monday night football. So we would be able to watch it on Wednesday. Okay. And that was pretty much the only interesting program right before practice. Sure. And and that was around, I think, 1997. I really liked that number 4 playing for the Packers, Brett Favre. Yes. And obviously they won the Super Bowl that year.
That's right. They beat the Patriots.
So, obviously the fact they won intrigued me a little bit more than searching online and learning that Green Bay is a fairly small town. Yes. Rural community. Yes. I come from a small town in a rural community. I was actually able to see them play in London, UK, a couple of years ago. Yes. With my wife, so we traveled to London for an entire weekend. NFL is really popular, and now they were playing in Brazil even. Sure. It's growing, but I was glad that the Packers were picked to play overseas and across the pond. So that was awesome to see the team actually play, and hopefully I will make it to Lambeau. I remember my wife and we went and visited London in 2010, and it was right before the Broncos and 49ers were going to play at Wembley. There's an article in the newspaper where the person writing the article was concerned that the big, fat, heavy linemen were going to destroy the pitch. Oh, the pitch. At Wembley. Yes. And so there was this huge thing about how fat guys were going to mess up the Wembley pitch. And I just remember thinking, what do they think America looks like? Like, is the surface of America just pockmarked and dented because of all these fat Americans walking around? So you're here in the U.S. For our British listeners. Can you confirm
that we also have flat fields despite having huge fat people walk out.
No, you do have flat fields and pristine as well. So
Excellent.
just because the Brits, I know, are really looking, into making sure the pitch looks great and cut at the same height.
That's
and
right.
No weeds, whatever.
That's right.
But no, you do that pretty well.
Another story that I'm interested. You've spent a lot of time in the U.S., in particular, working for a U.S. company. Tell me about the first time you visited the U.S.
Yeah, that was in 2009. I remember like it was yesterday. Because being a football fan, you start getting, I guess, to have a sense of the American culture.
Sure.
And everything it provides, like the freedom that sometimes in Europe where you tend to have a lot of control from the government, from a lot of things. And I don't know, US has always been that, land of promise and El Dorado. The trip was for school. I was in my engineering bachelor degree course at that time, and the entire class traveled overseas. So that was the first time for most of us going to the US. And we traveled through the Midwest.
Okay.
Agriculture engineering school.
Yes.
I think we landed in
You didn't get to
Omaha.
go to Miami. You didn't get to go to New York. You didn't get to go to LA.
No.
You went to Omaha.
Omaha.
Totally.
Yes. And Omaha, Des Moines, and I think
really the cultural epicenters of America.
Yes. And Madison, Wisconsin.
Yes.
Right. For the World Dairy Expo.
Yes.
Right. I think that was quite an experience because, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, having that attraction for the American culture, that was truly the first time I could physically experience it. Because then when you start traveling, you can interact with much more people. And then you can ask more questions and you can learn a lot from all these people that have different backgrounds and different cultures. Just going out in the street with a cup of coffee and this type of thing. I know that seems maybe simple, but when you're young, like 19, 20, there is that sense of freedom and I don't know, just that the opportunities are in front of you. So.
Excellent. Dovetailing off that cross-cultural experience, one of the things that your team, as it's grown over the years in Europe, I think you said it's ended up with 10 nationalities as a team.
Yeah, so 8 countries specifically, but 10 languages.
So that is an extremely unique experience for a person listening in the U.S. In an organization. How do you navigate not only language barriers or language limitations, but also cultural backgrounds?
Yeah, definitely been a learning curve. Sure. Still is.
Sure.
Because anytime you interact with someone from a different country, they bring their own uniqueness to the conversation. Overall, just being able to open up the communication lines, just trying to build that rapport, that relationship. I think that transcends cultures overall. Now, you need to be, I think, aware of certain notions, and a great book is The Culture Map from Erin Meyer.
Okay.
And she utilized the analogy or the metaphor of the peach and coconut.
Okay.
Right. Being Frenchman, our culture will be more like laden.
Okay.
In the sense that the trust that you're going to build with people is going to be done through relationships. So you and I are going to socialize around lunch and dinner. I think for the listeners, that's the reason why French like to spend 2 hours having lunch and having dinner.
Because it's not just a transaction of putting calories in my body. It's about interacting. It's about getting to know. It's about becoming comfortable with a person.
And it most like I need to get to know you a little bit more personally. So then I can trust you in a work environment that we're going to get the work done together. I need to have that personal connection with you. And then that's going to open up a lot more interactions, collaboration, and I think ultimately innovation if we work together on a project. It's a little bit harder, right, to pierce through the coconut, and it's a very gradual process. I'm not going to say that's going to be to form a relationship. That may just be appreciating one another. Yeah. But that's going to be done through what we accomplish together at work. Well, and maybe along the way, we can grab a beer after work or have dinner.
So like a coconut culture would be like the German culture, the Scandinavians, your French. And as you think about the peach cultures, that's going to be your Spaniards, your Italians, the Americans,
Argentina, Brazil, like all
your
South
Caribbean
America.
environment.
Yeah.
And so as you have a team that has some peaches and some coconuts.
Yeah.
As a leader, how do you make sure everyone understands the value of spending time together versus getting to business? What are some of the mechanics of that?
It comes down to first explain why that's important. To get to know one another. And even if you don't end up being best friends, you need to have a relationship and get to know the people you're going to interact with, that sometimes you will need help from, or that person may need help from you. So if you have a relationship or you get to know one another, to me, that's going to tear down the cultural barriers, because you're going to look at the person, not the culture. You have that relationship, you trust the person, so you can ask any questions. Just getting the people to understand why that's important in a multicultural environment, and that then teams can go faster.
Yeah.
And they also have more fun, because then you can also start having jokes.
Yes.
You know, when you talk about, the time flexibility for a Spaniard compared to a German, then people start joking about it.
Yeah.
So if, a Spaniard shows up 3 minutes late at a meeting, people are not upset. They may understand that, okay, he has a little bit more flexibility with time, so I'm not going to, start the meeting by running into his face and saying, well, you're late, and, this is how we do things around here. People may joke about it. And similarly, when you have a German that is timing everything and you got to be on schedule, instead of people feeling stressed, they know, like, okay, I need to make the effort to be on time, because I know for that person that's important.
It matters.
And that means a lot.
Yeah. I don't remember where I heard it, but I've heard before that humor is one of the highest forms of language understanding.
Yeah.
Have you found that many people are able to get to that level cross-culturally where they can actually make a reference or make a joke that is funny to another culture or to somebody else on the team?
I would say yes and no. There are some global themes or global jokes, proverbs that you can connect very quickly.
Sure.
Even though the translation is not perfectly accurate, you're going to get the meaning and what that means. Specifically, when you look at British or even Americans, you tend to have some metaphors or analogies.
Sometimes we live too much in the metaphors and analogies.
No, like, I'm not gonna say it correctly, but when you put the paste back in the
toothpaste back in the tube.
Yes, I can't remember who said that in a meeting, but nobody understood it. So people were moving their heads up and down. Right. They didn't get it, so that didn't resonate.
They had no idea that that's an impossibility. Yeah. That's a very difficult thing to do. Yeah.
But this is where then, for me, that was easier to then get back to that person and say, hey, expressions like this, I know for you, they could have an impact. They're going to get you some traction to prove a point. But maybe as you have many cultures out there, this is not necessarily very relevant. So maybe you need to simplify or just explain the joke before or what you mean exactly by that, because that's too abstract for some of these cultures.
In your experience, do Americans do it more often than other cultures? Use these colloquialisms or use these analogies?
Yeah, because maybe you're a more empirical culture than France, where we're everything about theory. So we're going to explain very abstract concept and make theories and a lot of that, versus you're more like, okay, I need to prove the point through a concrete example.
Got it.
And sometimes you're going to use these analogies because that's going to prove the point. And you have no idea how proud some of the people are, like, Frenchmen or German, to utilize that expression when they interact next time with an American. And you can actually see the American's reaction, like, okay, he knows the expression.
It's a connection point.
Yeah, you have that connection. And for people that want to be intentional, like, those are small clues that throughout all these conversations, that if you can spot them and observe and utilize them, I think that transcends culture, that builds relationship.
One other thing I really just am fascinated by your experience building a business from the ground up. You were one of the very first employees of Precision Planting to live on the European continent. Mm-hmm. The brand Precision Planting meant zero to any French farmer, any Italian farmer, any German farmer. The product line meant nothing to Europe. And over the course of 8 years, the business has grown to 9 figures. Mm-hmm. That is just a massive growth rate. Help me understand, what are some of those first steps that are so important to setting the right footing on building a brand?
Yeah. The first thing is you got to believe in what you want to do. You get a believing in the company's mission. And in that case, it was bringing a different vision of how a farm can be more profitable. And to me, that was something very unique.
Because you had been in the ag industry in Europe for years before.
Yep.
And came from an established ag company
right.
to a brand new, nobody's ever heard of this before.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people call me crazy. Like, why would you leave the number one company in their segment for a brand new business? There is something that is worth fighting for. I say fighting, not
working for something worth striving toward.
But literally, and just be passionate by the task. And that was certainly much more important. And then as you start slicing the elephant, because when you introduce a brand, start from scratch, there are so many things that you need to do, but you really need to work on the foundations. And this is where connecting with the company core values and really understand how these foundations were built and how all the people that you work with, I mean, there is a unifying concept or mission with all these employees, and just try to figure it out. That helps you prioritizing that. Then you can just go out there and pound the ground and make things happen.
One other thing that is so interesting as a business grows, whether it grows in Europe or it grows in the US, is the nature of the person that you're looking for with each employee that you bring on.
Right.
Tell me, what are you looking for in a first employee?
You will need to find that person that can actually go out there and make things happen with scarce resources or limited resources. Usually when you start a business, that's how it is. You don't have the processes, you don't have the procedures, you don't have all the support or backup than a more mature organization. So you got to find the person that is fine working with some ambiguity.
And comfortable in some chaos.
Yeah, some chaos. And there are people like this in every culture. You want to have the prophets type where they can speak and spread the message out there, and because they believe in that, and they want the others to hear that belief and over and over again and build a value proposition. Because usually when you have products that come from one region and then you try to sell them in another region, very seldomly that product is going to fit right away. Right. So you will need to understand some of the nuances and so forth. So just having that person that can connect all these dots and really focus on the main one or two priorities to start with.
As the business grows and you bring in the 5th person and the 10th person and the 15th person, you're now actually looking for someone that's maybe cut from a different cloth.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Because this is, as much as the initial people will be comfortable in chaos, like as your company mature and you look into expanding or having more and more projects, you also need to have some people that can bring some structure and organization to the mix, like without sacrificing the aggression of making things happen, but you still need to have that structure to balance growth. Right. The guys that will, pound the ground every single day and having some people that can support that and build some structure. I think that's where the mix is.
And my guess is, as I've experienced in my management journey, and you've experienced it as well, the tension that arrives is a business should never abandon that energetic, chaotic pursuit of new processes, new ways of thinking, new customers. But it also, over time, has to have structure.
Yes.
It has to have balance. It has to have coordination. What I've experienced and some of the most stressful and exciting events of my career are trying to find that balance of an organization that enables and equips the running ahead, but also enables and equips continuing to improve on what we've done. And the real balance is the actual human beings that fall into those categories. Both of them feel that the other one is going to mess this thing up. Right? The chaos guy looks at the process guy and says, you're going to kill us. You're going to kill us under bureaucracy. You're going to kill us under process. And the process guy looks at the chaos guy and says, you're going to kill us.
You're reckless.
Going to run us recklessly. Do you have any instances of that? Any stories of that? We'll change the names to protect the innocent. But as you think about your experience, where did that show up across the years?
Yeah, there is, I think, that inflection point when you have been, in the business let's say between 5 and 7 years. And as your company matures, and that could be tempting to bring these people who want to add structure, but you don't want them to be the bureaucrats or the aristocrats, because these will be the people that will not, let's say, support the team. They will build processes just to have a little bit more overwatch. To me, this is where that could be dangerous for an organization. Just adding more structure because you want to have more reports, or you want to have more visibility or more control on the people, versus the initial days where pretty much there was a high trust environment. You didn't need to know what that guy was doing because you knew things would be done. But that could be tempting as an organization grows to have more checkpoints, more control.
Authorizations, approvals,
delegation
forms,
of authority, like all these names in the corporate world that when you start hearing that, I don't know for you, but I don't know, I start cringing a little bit. But to
remember,
me, that's
the name of the podcast is Grody and UnProfessional. So you're amongst friends here.
When you start having a successful business after that initial 5-7 years, people will be tempted to kind of say, oh, they don't have processes here and there, and let's try to impose that on them. But actually, to me, that's counterproductive.
So as you were bringing the precision planting brand, an American brand, to growers in Germany or in France or in Ukraine, how did you present that to them?
Yeah. To me, again, getting back to the empirical side of your culture, everything is, or most of the things are focused on the ROI.
Yes.
So you're going to talk to an American farmer like, hey, this is the yield advantage, like XYZ bushel per acre. And then that means so many dollars per acre and times the number of acres, like, there you go. This is the additional profit.
You can't afford not to do this.
Yes.
Right.
This is a model that is very present over here versus Europe, where it's not necessarily, well, number one, we don't talk as much about money.
Okay.
I'm not going to say it's taboo, but you're going to talk a little bit less about the financials. Obviously, that's going to be important. But I think there is all that theoretical aspect of the why and the overall concept around it. So usually marketing strategies can be quite different in the sense that in the US, that can be very straightforward with that yield advantage that you're going to market out there. Maybe in Europe, that's going to be more how much you're going to save. So it's not how much more you're going to make, but maybe that's going to be a saving.
And is that pretty uniform across Europe, or even within countries within Europe? Is there subtlety?
Yeah, there are subtleties, even within Europe. So this is where the leading part, you can have very abstract concept, and that could get buy-in from the market. Not because people are naive, but as they get exposed to it, then they're going to start being able to picture that technology on their farms, for instance, versus Germany or the Nordics, Scandinavia. They're going to want to have studies from universities or certified organizations that will prove that what you say in your literature is backed up by someone locally that they trust.
Yes, an authority.
Yes, an authority that has been doing some of the studies. And then I think Eastern Europe maybe is closer to the US on that side, but it's more about the local value proposition because they have completely different conditions, different rainfalls, soil types, crop types, all of that. So it's more about making sure that you have local data and you take the time to invest locally to build that value proposition.
Yes.
That's Europe, but I think if you look at South Africa, Australia, Brazil, that's very similar too. Like once you have these local results, local data, people could adopt a new technology very fast, or just a new innovation brought to the market. They can adopt that very fast versus the old Europe, right? That is going to take a little bit more time to prove the concept and the why.
As you think about product, as you think about marketing, as you think about branding, as you think about product naming, what are the right aspects of the playbook that you take to another country? And what are the other aspects that you say, no, as we move into another country, we need to allow for local adaptation? One of the companies that you and I have talked about in the past is Coca-Cola. At one layer, Coca-Cola tastes the same across the globe. It's actually an engineering marvel that they can take a molecule and make sure that molecule gets to pretty much everywhere on Earth.
Yes.
I've even heard it said that there are places on Earth that have greater access to Coca-Cola than to clean water.
That's true.
And at one level, it's a commercial miracle that they can get the product to everywhere. Mm-hmm. But as you highlight and share some of your examples, how Coca-Cola is positioned is very different across 100 countries.
They've made a phenomenal job over the years to keep like the Coca-Cola name and never licensed it or changed their names across places. But like you say, the recipe, even the glass bottle.
Yes.
That this is the same.
It's sacred.
Everywhere. But I think they have made a great job at empowering their local organizations, pulling the right levers so that Coca-Cola will be successful in these different places. Europe, if you drink a Coke, it's like a taste of America. It is like, that cool guy that can have, the snapback or the hat and, the baseball cap and having a Coke. This is trendy. If you go to Asia or Eastern cultures, this is sometimes that's even their first exposure to the Western culture.
Sure.
That's going to be Coke or chewing gum. This is truly the first introduction for them to the Western culture, but still Coca-Cola has been able to market that this way. Mm-hmm. And people, even though this is not necessarily common practice, there is going to be, I don't know, that excitement, to pop that bottle open and, okay, what is that taste gonna be like?
Yeah. Because you were mentioning Coca-Cola's positioning in South Africa is very different than how it's positioned in, say, Germany or in China.
Yeah, South Africans like brandy. Well, and usually brandy goes with Coke. I think there are something like 60 million people in South Africa, and they drink 48 million liters of brandy. If you think about it, like for every liter of brandy, there is almost 4 liters of Coke, right?
It's a lot of Coke.
That could be fun. So pretty much the more brandy that gets consumed, the more Coke would get consumed too. So that's why they don't try to intervene or position it in a way that could harm them, but they just, go along and follow along the spirit industry and make sure that with every brandy, Coke will be next to it. When you see the way Coca-Cola, the institution and the name globally is recognized and revered, while at the same time they were able to let the local organization and entities do what's right and adopt their marketing strategies to what is relevant. That could have been easy for them to try to impose the American vision of Coca-Cola everywhere. Yes. That could have been very tempting. I'm sure there must have been a lot of conversations in C-suites, but I think they did a great job of letting the local people do it. And I think this is what, I know you talk about loosely coupled organization. Yeah. To me, that's one of them. And Coca-Cola keeps being successful.
Another example that comes to mind as I think about brands that have not taken just the home team playbook and enforced it across the globe is McDonald's. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a little bit of flack for this. My wife and I, we love traveling to Europe. We've been to Europe probably 10 times. And there's times where it's been a long day and it's a hot day and you want to get to the museum before it closes and you're hungry and there happens to be the Golden Arches in the town square and you say, you know what? I'm just going to taste home for a moment here. And so we'll run through the McDonald's in some of the finest cuisine European cities. I get it, but we'll stop at the McDonald's and we'll head on to the museum. And they take great pride in the fact that a French fry tastes the same everywhere. But what you see with McDonald's is you see adaptations of the menu for local taste. For instance, in India, they do not have a beef hamburger. In Germany, they have beer that you can purchase. They also have the best McFlurry globally. My personal opinion. I don't know why we don't have the Kit Kat McFlurry in the US, but every time I go to Europe, I'm certain to get a Kit Kat McFlurry. But same concept, which is there are ingredients in the playbook that are critical to maintain. However, there are other ingredients that are critical to allow for adaptation in the local market. Yeah. As you have led precision planting in Europe, what are some of those ingredients that you say, man, this is what we have to maintain. This is what it is to be precision planting. And these other ingredients is important to tailor to the local audience.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic, and that a lot of organizations are trying to wrestle with. Some of the most important things from this playbook is the organization mission. This is not tailored to a region. This is like the overarching goal for that organization. And you got to make sure that it's understood by the local organizations. This is going to connect people to the mothership.
Yes.
Right. That's going to fuel that pride.
For precision planting, there's a lot of ways it could be described, but one of them was the spirit in which a grower's existing equipment that was in his shed today and purchased years ago can be made through technology to be as good or better than any brand new planter or sprayer.
Right.
And that was an ingredient that whether your planter was in a shop in Iowa or in Ukraine or in Bolivia, that DNA was there.
You're perfectly right. And that's what unified us. That was the common goal. We were the retrofit organization. We're not the guy, opening a book and selling a new piece of equipment.
Right.
That was what resonated with everyone. That transcends culture.
Yes.
But again, what then you can tailor is more like, let's say, getting back to the example at precision planting, is that in the US, you have 3 major players in the planter market, covering 85% market share. This is very unique in the world. If you go to Argentina, for instance, you have, 40, 50 brands. Then when you get to Europe, you have 17 players. This is where then you need to take the time to adapt the technology to that equipment, to that brand, but also the crops. Because this is not just about corn and soybeans outside of the US. So again, and that's why another topic we talk about is to hire the right people that are not afraid to go through the motion about, okay, I know there is a product there, but I need to make sure it's relevant.
To use the restaurant analogy, there is some adaptation to the local taste. And for McDonald's, they're not willing to do that with the French fry, but they are willing to do that with the McFlurry, or they're able to do that with which beverage is brought with it. This is core to who we are, and this other component, we're going to adapt that to the local taste. The example you used is they have different color planters. They have different size planters. They had different crops that they were put in. And it was to say, okay, we're going to take this product line, which is very valuable and recognized in the US, but we need to talk about it in a different way, either because farm size is different, or because equipment size is different, or because financing of equipment is different. It has to be talked about in a different way.
And just being adaptable.
Yeah.
Because very seldomly the market conditions are the same across the globe.
Correct.
So being adaptable, having that flexibility, that autonomy in that construction of the playbook.
Another example at Precision Planting that we were very focused on, a company culture that trained and educated. That did not just include training the dealer and educating the dealer on product and installation. That included training and educating the customer. One of the things that I was really proud to hear regularly is that the spirit of an event in a farmer's field, whether it be in Minnesota, in Argentina, or in France, the spirit and the heart of care for the customer, maybe different crop, maybe different equipment, definitely a different time of the year, definitely a different language, but the spirit of, I want you to be the hero of your story. I want to give you information free of charge with our trials that can allow you to leave today and be better at growing a crop. The spirit of it is global, but the practical application of it was different from one continent to another. What you also highlight across the conversation, it's not always obvious in advance or even sometimes in situ of what part of the recipe has to stay pure and what part of the recipe can adapt. But having an organization that is willing to experiment, having an organization that is willing to sometimes take that next right step and then back it up if it turns out it wasn't the right step, and also having an organization that has interpersonal relationships with leaders that are tied to the mission more so than just career advancement or personal brand or personal strength. Having an organization that it was missional, we said, okay, we know what the mission is. In this farm show in Argentina, do we change the name of the product to a word that means something in Spanish? Or do we keep the name of the product, the word that's selling really well in the US, but an Argentine ear has never heard that word before? Those questions were never purely obvious in the moment, but I think what helps an organization navigate that is candor, honesty, transparency, and I would even say flexibility. You learn, okay, we changed the name and it sold brilliantly. You know what? It's actually a good idea if the name of your product is a word that the person has ever heard of before. But then you can't take it to its complete logical end, which is to have 200 names globally for one product because you have 200 languages that you're selling it into. What I always observed is, bluntly, it's a balancing act. And the hard part about balancing acts is that it takes continuous work and continuous effort and continuous feedback to stay balanced on a tightrope. There's never a day you can fall asleep on a tightrope. You have to be constantly considering and evaluating, and the faster information can flow through the organization to give feedback that says, oh, we're tipping, you can make the adjustment.
And there is an aspect to that I think as an organization is very important, is the fear or not fear of failure. And how you define failure in an organization. If you want to be conservative, like most of the corporate world, you're going to want to make sure that things are validated in a lab, keep the engineering team almost in a bubble. And consultants that will be around will say, no,
somebody else to take the blame.
I think it's good to go to market without exactly knowing, like from a customer standpoint, whether that's actually true. Instead of the teams that will go out there with a completely imperfect products, a product that may not meet the basic expectations. But then as you start having this feedback, then you can learn, iterate, fail again, learn again, and then you have multiple iterations, and that helps you to go much faster, and you're more nimble and more flexible. And I think at the end, within your teams, you also build a lot of resilience. I think through these behaviors, then you foster the culture that is ultimately connected to your mission. Once you have this type of behaviors that are encouraged, and leaders that actually lead by example, this is something truly impactful across cultures. And I think the best leaders out there, they are revered globally because they were the ones that were encouraging people regardless of where they were coming from and letting them experiment and validate and build relevancy for a product or a line in the marketplace. So,
talk to me a little bit about, you spent many years working at a Swedish company. You mentioned being number one ag company in agriculture, an established European brand, and then moving to an American company, still in agriculture. Compare and contrast some of your experiences between the two organizations.
This is quite interesting to look at it with some hindsight, but I think one of the differences I could see is the hierarchy or the pyramid is non-existent almost in Sweden. Don't get me wrong, there was still accountability and so forth, but still you have a lot of open discussions, forums between people. Some of them happen, like there is a coffee break in the morning and in the afternoon in Sweden. This is called fika. So you have a coffee in the morning and people will just get all together around tables. And I mean, you would be amazed by the amount of interactions happening. And it can be both personal, right? Getting to know someone, asking how the family goes or whatever. But that can also be an extension of the meeting that just ended up, or potentially the upcoming meeting. And during these interactions, what really amazed me is you don't have, let's say, it's not because you are high in the hierarchy that you're going to be the one doing the talking.
So inside of a room in which fika is taking place,
cafeteria,
the CEO may be talking to an entry-level engineer. It's not that all the executives move to one side of the room and all the...
Nope.
engineers. They actually cross the.
Oh yeah, there is no VIP reserve tables or seats. Like it's first in.
That would scare a lot of American executives, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I know you've been to not Sweden but Finland, but I think the sauna experience on Friday afternoons is something I think we all remember.
Right. So you've spent some time in a sauna.
Yeah, like a few times.
So for the American listener, if you could give the version of what Scandinavian sauna means.
Well, I'm gonna try to be very direct and explicit here.
Yeah. Yes, you're gonna break.
But it's pretty much a small wooden house.
Yes.
Where you have the stones, like the very super hot stones, and you're gonna pour water.
Yes.
On top of the stones, and then you're gonna have steam, and the temperature is gonna go in the 120 degrees.
Very hot.
Right. So then you're gonna sweat.
Yes.
And usually you get in there naked.
Yes.
Right.
With coworkers. Right, and that's the part that shocks an American audience.
Well, coworkers, but even the boss or the CEO or the vice president,
right.
And most of them, they're going to show up with a 6-pack of beer.
And it's a social event. Yes. It's entirely a social event.
Yeah, that's almost like a community event, but this is mutually shared and appreciated. And
there are company headquarters that have a sauna on the property. Like these people are not going home. Mm-hmm. They are leaving the office, going across the parking lot, getting into their birthday suit, and then with the same people that they've been working with. To an American, this is unheard of. This is impossible. But yeah, it's the cultural way of connecting to one another. I was going to make the joke, is that why it's a coconut culture? Maybe we'll just leave that joke there. But you mentioned that. So I went on a trip to Finland. I love the Finns. The Finns that I know, they are wonderful people. Mm-hmm. And we got an email in advance of the trip. And it said, here's the agenda. We're going to be here. We're going to be here. The hotel's here. Do this, do this, do this. And then there was this one bullet at the bottom that said, bring a swimsuit. And 2 weeks later, another email comes out. Make sure you have your flights, send your hotel information, this bullet at the bottom, bring a swimsuit. And so I was talking to a friend of mine in the US here who was going on the trip as well. And I said, it's funny that they keep reminding us to bring a swimsuit. I mean, I guess I go on a lot of business trips. No American really brings a swimsuit to a business trip. So it's nice that they're reminding me to bring a swimsuit. Mm-hmm. And he just looks at me and says, Justin, that's not there for you. What? He said, no, that line is not there for you to remember to bring a swimsuit. It's for the Finns. Telling them that they have to wear a swimsuit inside of the sauna. That was my first introduction to Finnish sauna. And so, it's a very different experience.
Yeah. The second aspect that I think from a Nordic culture versus the American one is the quest for consensus. When you are in a setting with Swedes, they have many meetings.
Okay.
They like meeting. They really put the emphasis on collaboration and communication to reach consensus. You may have preparatory meetings or meetings to prepare the upcoming meetings.
Sure.
But just so the person who is going to present the project is going to make sure that everybody understands where they are at. He's not going to try to force his point, but he wants to make sure that people are aware. Like there won't be any surprise during the meeting, because being emotional during a meeting in Sweden is not permitted. Now that can happen,
sure,
but this is not necessarily a way
behavior.
To build collaboration whatsoever. During these meetings, every single one person around the table will speak and will give feedback or give his opinion. So then the curator of the meeting can take that into account and adjust if needed.
So then once full consensus is attained, then you would proceed.
Yeah, I think that's more perceived consensus.
Okay.
Because even if you don't agree 100% with the person, if you understand why and how we get to that point, then it's easier to support that person. See what I mean? Maybe that's not exactly the way you would have done it.
Sure.
But since you understand the sequence, the thought process, and the different interactions with the team, that's easier to be a supporter.
In the U.S.,
that's it.
At least my work experience in the U.S., it's very common for a meeting to actually take the form of a debate.
Yes.
Which is that you're going to have a lead debater to one side, supporting arguments and a supporting kind of cast. And then generally someone's going to take the counter position.
Yes.
With supporting arguments and supporting cast. And that doesn't, I've even seen it where it isn't that any one person necessarily believes in the argument they're making.
Right.
You're saying in a Scandinavian environment, that would be very unprofessional. It would be very awkward to take that.
Or you will have to mention it out loud. Like, hey, I'm going to play devil here. So I'm going to ask questions like ahead of time to challenge what you were just showing us. But just trying again to maintain the baseline emotional level to what it's supposed to be in a room. I don't think one is better than the other, right? Sure. That's not the point of these differences, but it's more that there are sort of codes and habits and customs that I feel like if you don't do your due diligence before traveling to a country that you've never been to, that can be important.
One last topic that I just want to touch on that is a very complex leadership scenario. You had on your team both Russians and Ukrainians 3 years ago when the war broke out. As a leader, how do you navigate those waters?
Yeah, that's tough because you mentioned playbook before.
Yeah.
But leading in times of war, there are no playbooks.
Right, right.
There is no literature that will tell you exactly the conversations you should have and so on and so forth. That was in February. I was supposed to be in Ukraine, actually, when the first attacks. That was February 23rd or 22nd, I think. Can't remember, but to me, that was just making sure they would be provided with the basics.
Because there was, early on, it was about evacuating families. It was about making sure people were safe on the Ukrainian side.
Well, and even, being in shelters. Do you have a shelter? So this is where, like, I mean, when you go through that, you truly realize that the next earning call or whatever with Wall Street is pretty much nothing compared to when you have employees going through that. You see what I'm not trying to digress, right?
No.
But I think this is where you truly realize
what becomes important becomes very important very quickly.
Yeah. And again, I think this is where culture has nothing to do with the conversation you have, because you just want to make sure that people are fine, taken care of, just try to find ways to help as much as possible, even though you really feel useless or powerless. What's also amazing at the same time is after some time that people start getting used to that situation, people start going back to work, and then it's almost like business gets done as usual.
Sure.
And this is where our Ukrainian employees, they decided to go to the field, because for them, that's what needed to be done to help their countries.
To help their country and
their families.
And their family.
And the customers and the leaders and so on and so forth. So this is where you cannot necessarily get in the way of that, saying like, no, guys, you should stay home. Because at the end, that's what they wanted. And I think they needed that too.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to predict that. But I just think you got to go with the flow and again, communicate and see how that goes.
Did you have to do anything specific about the interaction between the Russian employees and the Ukraine employees in what becomes a very awkward situation?
Yeah. Well, number one, in that case, there was already some stories back in 2014 in Crimea. There were still a lot of combats going on in the eastern side. This has been something boiling or going down for a decade now.
Yeah.
In our case, you got to appreciate that a lot of people living in south of Russia, they have a lot of Ukrainian family members. Most of them were born in Ukraine, or one of our Russian employees, his family reside in Ukraine, right in the middle of the front line. So in that case, you don't need to try to get people together to talk, because they were doing that.
They were doing that
before, and this was not forced.
Yeah.
Now there was some candor from Russians, because they were like, well, should I take news from my Ukrainian friends and colleagues but how are they going to perceive me? There is a point of time where people are people. I think in that case, yeah, we didn't force anything or impose anything. Like these interactions came naturally between them.
It was on a foundation of a healthy relationship, interpersonal relationship between the employees before.
Yep.
There's a YouTuber that my kids and I watch.
Okay.
His main thing is he's been to every country in the globe.
Wow.
So even the hard ones. So he took a trip to Pyongyang. He's been everywhere, and he films it. And he makes this statement, which I think is so valuable, which is people are not their governments.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's so much news, no matter what country you're in, there's so much news about which governments do this thing and which governments do that thing and what is their motivation. But when you're sitting across the table with someone, you're not sitting across the table with their government.
Right.
You're sitting across the table with the person.
Yep.
And I think both my experience and just what I've loved watching you lead in that environment is there are cultures, there are habits, there are coconuts and peaches, and there are these things. But at the end of the day, and you said it, you boil it down. It's a human interaction of respecting one another, caring for one another, rooting for one another, enabling one another. And there's a lot of questions in how to do that and when to do that and what's the right way to do that. But I think in general, my experience has been, if you can communicate that across the language, you said it, there's grace that comes in the practical oftentimes.
Yeah, and people that are listening, that's one of the key takeaways, that when you're in a multicultural setting, as long as you have the humility and you let people know that you don't have it all figured out and you don't pretend to know, they will extend grace all the time. Yeah. Well, as long as your words match your deeds, right? It's one thing to say it, that's another to make it happen. But
Benoit, I could not thank you enough for traveling halfway across the globe just for the purpose of sitting down and spending the morning talking with me.
No, thank you. That was awesome getting to see you, and wish you all the best.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
For those of you that wish to share comments, praises, and accolades, or if you would like to start a campaign to bring the Kit Kat McFlurry to the US, I can be reached via my email, justin@grody.io. For all other requests, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope along with 3 easy payments of $19.95 to 124 Conch Street, Bikini Bottom, Pacific Ocean. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.